Force your body to burn visceral belly fat with this morning routine. It sounds bold, but what if I told you that within the first 60 minutes after waking up, your body enters a unique biological state, a metabolic window that can determine whether you burn fat or store it for the rest of the day? Visceral belly fat is not just a cosmetic issue, it is the dangerous fat that surrounds your liver, pancreas, and vital organs strongly linked to insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, and metabolic dysfunction. And unfortunately, most people unknowingly trigger fat storage mechanisms. First thing in the morning, mistimed coffee, eating too early, blue light exposure, unconscious stress spikes. Today's video is not about extreme dieting or exhausting workouts. Instead, we'll break down the science behind a biologically precise morning routine designed to lower insulin, optimize cortisol rhythms, activate fat-burning enzymes, and properly wake up your metabolism. If you're ready to stop fighting your body and start working with its natural biology, stay with me until the end. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future science-based breakdowns that help you understand and take control of your own physiology, not fear. To understand why the first 45-90 minutes after waking can influence how your body handles belly fat for the entire day, we need to start with a very specific biological phenomenon, the Cortisol Awakening Response (CAR), the natural rise in cortisol that occurs shortly after you open your eyes. Cortisol is often labeled the bad hormone, but in reality, it is a survival hormone. In the morning, a healthy cortisol spike helps you wake up, mobilize energy, slightly raise blood pressure so you can stand, and activate your nervous system. This spike is not random. It is a circadian event orchestrated by your brain's master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which receives light input and coordinates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When CAR unfolds properly, cortisol rises sharply within the first 30-45 minutes and then gradually declines through the morning. This pattern resembles a clean ignition followed by steady stabilization. You feel alert and focused without anxiety. Glucose is mobilized appropriately, and the system transitions smoothly into efficient energy use. However, if you send the wrong signals upon waking dehydration, chaotic artificial light, immediate phone stimulation, caffeine too early, the cortisol curve can become distorted. Instead of a sharp peak and downward slope, you experience prolonged elevated cortisol. When cortisol remains high for too long, the body shifts from a mobilize, then stabilize mode into a defend and store mode. This is where visceral belly fat becomes central. Physiologically, visceral fat, the fat surrounding organs such as the liver and intestines, contains a higher density of cortisol receptors than subcutaneous fat. This makes it especially sensitive to stress signals. When cortisol remains elevated, the body interprets the environment as unsafe, under perceived threat. The priority is energy storage, not expenditure. The enzyme lipoprotein lipase, LPL, functions as a storage switch. When active in adipose tissue, it facilitates the transport of fatty acids and triglycerides from the bloodstream into fat cells for storage. Elevated cortisol can promote conditions that make visceral fat particularly receptive to storing incoming energy. The key insight is this: your body is not stubbornly clinging to belly fat out of spite. It is responding to survival signals. In a biologically stressed state, whether due to poor sleep, chronic anxiety, or overstimulation, in the morning sustained cortisol elevation influences glucose mobilization, insulin sensitivity, and creates an environment favorable for energy storage if food intake follows. When repeated daily, this metabolic pattern gradually shifts toward storage. You may not be eating more than before, and you may even be exercising consistently. But if baseline cortisol signaling remains dysregulated, the body still prioritizes protective fat accumulation around vital organs. self-care, therefore, is not a minor hormonal detail. It is the opening rhythm of your entire metabolic symphony. A healthy car is like laying a stable foundation. Cortisol rises sharply to initiate the day, then declines to allow stability. A disrupted car resembles an alarm that never fully turns off. When the alarm persists, the body hesitates to unlock stored energy, and visceral fat, with its high cortisol sensitivity, becomes the primary storage site. In short, belly fat is not merely about calories. It is about signals. If your morning begins in biological chaos, a distorted cortisol curve sets the stage for storage throughout the day. Conversely, if you allow your nervous system and hormonal axis to complete their natural cycle, a brief spike followed by a clear decline, you send a message of safety, enabling energy utilization rather than hoarding. Understanding this mechanism shifts the focus from forcing fat burn to creating conditions where fat burning feels safe to the body. And it all begins with how you start your morning. The 5 morning steps. Step 1. Hydration reset. If cortisol is the conductor of your metabolic orchestra in the morning, then water is the first physiological rhythm your body perceives. After 7-8 hours of sleep, you are not only energy depleted, you are also mildly dehydrated. Throughout the night, your body loses water through breathing, subtle perspiration, and metabolic processes. The exact amount varies, but waking in a slightly reduced plasma volume state is normal. When plasma volume decreases, blood becomes more concentrated, and the heart must work harder to maintain output. This represents a mild physiological stress. In response, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis may maintain slightly elevated cortisol to support energy mobilization and blood pressure stability. Many people reach for coffee immediately upon waking. Caffeine stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, increases heart rate, and has mild diuretic properties. In a body that is already dehydrated, this stimulation may amplify stress signals rather than stabilize them. The issue is not that coffee is inherently harmful, but that timing and physiological context matter. If the goal is to allow a sharp, healthy cortisol peak followed by a natural decline, early stimulation may prolong or distort that curve in individuals sensitive to stress. The proposed solution is simple. Drink a large glass of room temperature water immediately upon waking, before introducing strong stimuli. Water restores plasma volume, supports oxygen and nutrient transport, and reduces cardiovascular strain in the first moments of the day. Choosing room temperature water instead of ice-cold water may avoid sudden vasoconstrictive reflexes in sensitive individuals. Though this effect is modest for most people, the main objective is rehydration before activating the nervous system with light, movement, or caffeine. More controversial is the addition of a small pinch of sea salt. The rationale relates to sodium's role in fluid balance and the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. When the body senses sodium depletion or low volume, aldosterone rises to retain salt and water, and stress pathways may activate to maintain blood pressure. In certain individuals, especially heavy sweaters, endurance athletes, or those consuming very low sodium diets, a small sodium intake may help signal adequate resource availability. However, the claim that salt immediately lowers cortisol should be approached cautiously. Cortisol regulation depends on circadian rhythm, light exposure, sleep quality, psychological state, inflammation, and metabolic factors. Salt is not a direct on-off switch for cortisol, but rather a modest contributor to fluid and blood pressure balance. Adding lemon is sometimes suggested for potassium support and liver stimulation. While potassium is essential for electrolyte balance and neuromuscular function, the amount provided by a small squeeze of lemon is minimal. Its primary benefit may lie in improving taste, digestive stimulation, and increasing adherence to the hydration habit rather than producing dramatic hormonal changes. The core principle is simple. Begin the day by restoring fluid balance before stimulating the nervous system. Morning hydration is physiologically sound. However, not everyone should add salt, especially individuals with hypertension, kidney disease, or sodium restrictions. For them, plain water may be sufficient. The goal is not a magical ritual, but a foundational signal resources are replenished. The environment is stable, and excessive stress activation is unnecessary. When step 1 is implemented appropriately, gently, consciously, and tailored to individual needs, it sets the stage for the subsequent signals: light exposure, movement, and properly timed caffeine. Not because water is miraculous, but because a nervous system that begins in balance is more likely to maintain a healthy cortisol rhythm throughout the day. Step 2. Morning light protocol. After restoring fluid balance and reducing early physiological strain on the cardiovascular system, the body enters a crucial phase: biological orientation for the day ahead. If step 1 restores resources, step 2 sets the time compass. In human biology, no signal is more powerful than morning light. Natural sunlight, particularly within the first 30-60 minutes after waking, is dramatically more intense than indoor lighting. Even on cloudy days, outdoor light can exceed 10,000 lux, while typical indoor lighting ranges between 300 and 500 lux. This difference is not trivial, it is a neural signal. When sunlight reaches the retina without directly staring at the sun, specialized retinal ganglion cells transmit signals directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, in the hypothalamus, the brain's master circadian clock. The SCN synchronizes numerous systems: hormone secretion, body temperature, sleep-wake cycles, and even gene expression related to metabolism. When it receives strong morning light, it confirms that a new day has begun. This triggers a sharp, healthy cortisol peak, not prolonged and chaotic, but clean and followed by a gradual biological decline. The healthy pattern is not low cortisol all day. It is a strong morning rise followed by a steady taper. Cortisol is not the enemy. A well-timed morning peak enhances alertness, focus, and readiness for activity. Problems arise when this peak is delayed, blunted, or shifted due to insufficient natural light. If you wake up and are exposed only to dim artificial light, the SCN lacks the necessary input for synchronization. The result may be a flattened circadian rhythm. Cortisol fails to peak clearly in the morning, and instead rises inappropriately later in the day when it should be declining. This misalignment affects sleep quality. Morning light indirectly regulates melatonin, the hormone responsible for nighttime sleepiness. Adequate morning light starts a 14-1 6-hour countdown. By evening, melatonin rises appropriately, supporting deeper sleep. Without sufficient morning light combined with excessive evening screen exposure, circadian rhythm disruption occurs. Poor sleep elevates baseline cortisol, impairs insulin sensitivity, and increases the tendency to accumulate visceral fat. Reduced sugar cravings may also be an indirect benefit. Stable circadian rhythms and improved sleep regulate ghrelin hunger hormone and leptin satiety hormone. Proper cortisol timing reduces afternoon energy crashes that often drive sugar consumption. Morning light does not directly burn fat, but it creates a favorable hormonal environment. When cortisol declines appropriately after its morning peak instead of remaining elevated all day, the hormonal milieu becomes less conducive to visceral fat storage. Light is not magic, it is leverage. Importantly, this component is strongly supported by circadian biology research. Morning light exposure improves sleep, mood stability, and hormonal regulation. It is not a social media trend. It is a fundamental biological principle. Humans are designed to synchronize with the sun. If step 1 signals resources restored, Step 2 signals the day has begun. Together, hydration and natural light establish the foundation for metabolic rhythm, rather than forcing fat burning. You are aligning your endocrine system with its intended biological timing. And in physiology, alignment is often more powerful than force. Step 3. The 90-minute caffeine rule. If morning light initiates your circadian rhythm naturally, caffeine functions like an artificial accelerator. The issue is not whether coffee is good or bad, but when you introduce it into your nervous system, after rehydrating and exposing yourself to morning light to establish a healthy cortisol curve, the next biological signal is allowing your body to complete its intrinsic awakening process before adding stimulation. This is the foundation of the 90-minute rule. During sleep, your brain is not inactive. It clears metabolic byproducts accumulated during wakefulness, including an important molecule, adenosine. Adenosine builds up throughout the day and creates sleep pressure, the sensation of tiredness. During quality sleep, the brain's glymphatic system removes much of this adenosine. However, upon waking, residual adenosine remains circulating. Your body is in a transitional state between sleep and full wakefulness. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain. It does not eliminate adenosine. It simply prevents it from binding to its receptors and signaling fatigue. If you drink coffee immediately after waking, caffeine masks the remaining sleep pressure. You feel alert quickly, but intrinsic clearance processes are not fully complete. Adenosine continues accumulating behind the caffeine blockade. When caffeine begins to metabolize, often early afternoon depending on individual sensitivity, adenosine can bind to receptors more robustly. This phenomenon is often experienced as an afternoon energy, crash sudden fatigue, reduced focus, irritability. The body interprets this energy drop as stress. The biological response to stress is cortisol release. Elevated afternoon cortisol disrupts the natural daily hormone curve. It may increase anxiety, impair evening sleep, and destabilize blood sugar. In response to this crash, many people reach for sugary snacks. Blood glucose spikes. Insulin follows. And if this pattern repeats, metabolism gradually shifts toward storage, particularly in cortisol-sensitive visceral fat. Waiting approximately 90 minutes before consuming caffeine allows your natural cortisol awakening response to complete and adenosine to clear more effectively. When caffeine is introduced after intrinsic wakefulness stabilizes, it enhances performance rather than compensates for incomplete activation. Many individuals report more stable afternoon energy and fewer crashes when delaying caffeine. That said, 90 minutes is not a universal rule. Circadian rhythm, sleep quality, caffeine sensitivity, and personal habits all influence response. Some may do well with 60 minutes, others may require longer. The key principle is understanding the mechanism allow natural awakening before blocking adenosine signaling. Caffeine is not inherently detrimental to metabolism or fat loss. However, mistimed use can distort cortisol patterns and create a cycle of crash and compensation. Aligning caffeine timing with circadian biology supports more stable hormonal rhythms and in the context of visceral fat regulation. Stability matters more than a temporary boost in alertness. Step 4. Slow walking and optic flow. After establishing biological stability through hydration, light exposure, and appropriate caffeine timing, the next step is not about burning as many calories as possible. It is about regulating the nervous system. This is where many people misunderstand the strategy. We are often told that if we want to reduce belly fat, we should perform high-intensity exercise as early as possible. However, in the context of elevated baseline stress and cortisol, high-intensity signals may not be interpreted by the body as beneficial. When you perform HIIT immediately after waking, especially if sleep was insufficient or psychological stress is present, the body may interpret temporary hypoxia, rapid heart rate, and metabolic strain as threat signals. The sympathetic nervous system activates strongly. Cortisol and adrenaline increase. This is not inherently harmful. HIIT has substantial cardiovascular and metabolic benefits in well-recovered individuals. However, if cortisol is already elevated or the morning curve has not declined properly, adding another stress spike may prolong the alarm state. The proposed alternative is a 10-15 minute slow walk, ideally outdoors. Moving forward. The mechanism is not primarily caloric but neurological, specifically related to optic flow. As you walk forward, visual scenery smoothly passes across your retina. Neuroscientific research suggests that forward-moving visual flow can reduce amygdala activation, the brain's threat detection center. From an evolutionary perspective, controlled forward movement signaled agency and safety. If our ancestors were walking and observing their environment without attack, the situation was stable. The nervous system learned that forward motion under control meant relative safety. While modern contexts differ, the nervous system still responds to these visual and movement patterns. A calm, steady walk may therefore function as a safety signal. Reduced amygdala activation allows the parasympathetic nervous system to dominate. Heart rate stabilizes. Breathing deepens. Cortisol is more likely to decline rather than remain elevated. In metabolic terms, this state matters. A body in perceived safety is more metabolically flexible, more capable of switching between glucose and fat utilization efficiently. This does not mean a short walk instantly burns visceral fat. Rather, it creates a hormonal and neural environment that supports healthier metabolic regulation over time. It is important to emphasize that HIIT is not inherently harmful for everyone. For individuals who are well-rested, low stress, and physically conditioned, high-intensity exercise improves insulin sensitivity, VO2 max, and mitochondrial adaptation. The issue is timing and context. If you wake up already stressed, with elevated heart rate and dysregulated cortisol, intense training may amplify alarm signals rather than optimize metabolism. By contrast, combining morning light with gentle forward walking sends two reinforcing signals: circadian alignment and controlled movement. This represents mild hormetic stress sufficient to activate metabolism, but not enough to trigger emergency mode. It communicates we are active and we are safe. In that state, defensive fat storage mechanisms are less likely to dominate. Ultimately, Step 4 is not about maximizing calories burned in 15 minutes. It is about optimizing nervous system state for the next 15 hours. In managing visceral fat, nervous system tone often matters more than acute exercise intensity. Choosing intentional forward movement over reactive intensity reflects biological precision rather than extremism. In physiology, appropriate dosage is more powerful than excess. Step 5. No phone for the first 30 minutes. If the previous 4 steps focused on regulating hormones and the nervous system through physiology, hydration, light, caffeine timing, and movement, Step 5 addresses a powerful modern influence, often underestimated attention. The way you use the first 30 minutes of your cognitive bandwidth can shape hormonal patterns throughout the day. Upon waking, the brain is in a uniquely sensitive state. Brain waves transition between theta and alpha, a liminal zone between subconscious and conscious awareness. The nervous system is still completing its shift from sleep to wakefulness. If you immediately open your phone and scroll social media, check email, or consume negative news, you introduce strong neural stimulation before stability is established. Social media is not just information, it is a dopamine-based reward system. Notifications and engagement trigger anticipation reward cycles. Dopamine itself is not harmful, it supports motivation and learning. However, abrupt dopamine spikes in the early morning, when the brain is still in a transitional state, can accelerate sympathetic nervous system activation. Simultaneously, exposure to urgent messages, social comparison, or work-related stress can activate the amygdala and stress pathways. Reactivity replaces intention. The sympathetic nervous system engages. Heart rate increases. Cortisol may remain elevated instead of declining after its morning peak. This matters because cortisol responds not only to physical stress but also to cognitive stress. A stressful email or heated online interaction can elicit a similar physiological response to a mild threat. When fight or flight is activated in the first 30-60 minutes of the day, the cortisol curve may remain elevated rather than stabilize. By delaying phone use for at least 30 minutes, you allow the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, to establish baseline regulation. In this state, heart rate stabilizes, breathing deepens, and the body shifts toward energy optimization rather than defense. A stable parasympathetic tone supports metabolic flexibility and reduces defensive energy storage signals. This is not about extreme mindfulness or rejecting technology. It is about sequencing signals. By preventing external demands from flooding your nervous system immediately, you maintain control over internal biological rhythms. Light, movement, and breath precede information and pressure. Neuroscientific research supports this logic. Digital overstimulation early in the day can increase anxiety and reduce heart rate variability, HRV, a marker of autonomic balance. Higher HRV correlates with stronger parasympathetic tone and greater stress resilience. Starting the day reactively rather than proactively tends to reduce HRV. Ultimately, Step 5 is about protecting the cortisol slope. If morning cortisol needs to peak and decline, the first 30 minutes should reinforce that decline, not trigger additional spikes. By safeguarding this window, you create a biological state of safety before engaging with external demands. And in the broader context of visceral fat regulation, perceived biological safety is foundational to efficient energy utilization rather than continued storage. After understanding each step individually, the most important factor is not the action itself, but the order. Biology responds more powerfully to sequencing than to intensity. When signals are delivered in the correct order, the body interprets the environment as stable and predictable. That stability influences how energy is handled for the next 12-16 hours. Imagine a morning structured according to biological rhythm 600, wake up. No phone, no stimulation. Allow the nervous system to complete its transition from sleep to wakefulness. 601, water plus salt if appropriate. Restore plasma volume. Signal that resources are available. Reduce the need for prolonged cortisol activation. 605, 10 minutes of sunlight. Strong light stimulates the SCN. A clean cortisol peak is established. Circadian timing resets. Tonight's melatonin release is already being programmed. 615, 10-15-minute walk. Forward movement and optic flow calm the amygdala. Parasympathetic tone increases. Cortisol begins its natural decline rather than remaining elevated. Before 7:30, no phone. Protect neurological stability. Avoid dopamine spikes and cognitive stress. Prevent a secondary cortisol surge. 8:30, coffee. After approximately 90 minutes, adenosine has cleared more naturally. Caffeine now enhances alertness rather than masking incomplete wakefulness. This sequence follows a biological logic: restore, orient, move, stabilize, enhance. When practiced consistently, many individuals report fewer afternoon crashes. If the morning cortisol curve rises and declines appropriately, instead of rising and staying elevated, the likelihood of a 2-3p. M. Energy crash decreases. Reduced crashes often translate into fewer sugar cravings and less reactive snacking. However, claims such as eating 30–40% less should be approached cautiously. There is no universal biological guarantee of such reduction. What is more plausible is that stable circadian rhythm and hormone regulation improve hunger satiety signaling, thereby reducing stress-driven or crash-driven eating. The magnitude of caloric reduction varies individually. Unlocking belly fat does not mean immediate fat loss. It means creating a hormonal environment more favorable to energy utilization. When baseline cortisol is not chronically elevated and insulin fluctuations are reduced, metabolic flexibility improves. Between meals, the body is more likely to utilize fatty acids, a necessary condition for long-term visceral fat reduction. Most importantly, this protocol operates cumulatively. One morning changes little. 30 consistent mornings can influence hormonal baselines. 90 days can impact insulin sensitivity and sleep architecture. Biology favors repetition. The nervous system favors predictability. When correct signals are delivered in the right order daily, the body gradually shifts from defense toward optimization. Ultimately, the power lies not in any single step, but in the logic of sequencing, when you stop fighting biology and begin aligning with it. Fat burning becomes less about force and more about permission. In metabolism, perceived safety precedes performance. If we had to summarize this entire morning protocol in one sentence, it would be this: you are not forcing your body to burn fat. You are convincing it that burning fat is safe. Visceral fat is not a sign of weakness or lack of discipline. It is often the result of a hormonal system trying to protect you from repeated stress signals. When cortisol remains elevated, when sleep is disrupted, when dopamine and stimulation flood your brain the moment you wake up, the body chooses storage over expenditure, not because it is working against you, but because it is fulfilling its survival role. The 5-step morning sequence: hydration, light exposure, delayed caffeine, gentle walking, and protected attention is simply a reordering of biological priorities. When you restore fluid balance before stimulation, expose your circadian clock to natural light, allow adenosine to clear, choose safe movement over stress, and prevent immediate digital intrusion, you establish a healthy cortisol curve rise, then decline, not prolonged elevation. Will this automatically make you eat 30–40% less or instantly melt belly fat? No universal biological guarantee exists. But what is far more plausible is this: when hormones stabilize and the nervous system exits defensive mode, afternoon crashes decrease, sugar cravings decline, sleep improves, and insulin sensitivity strengthens. These are the foundational conditions required for long-term visceral fat reduction. Most importantly, this is not a diet or a short challenge. It is circadian recalibration. And circadian rhythm does not shift after one morning. It shifts after weeks of repeated, consistent signals. If this approach feels logical, science-based, and practical, start tomorrow. Not perfectly, just in the right order. And if you want to continue understanding how hormones, circadian biology, and metabolism interact, subscribe and follow the channel. Here, we don't chase miracles. We realign biology so your body can do what it was designed to do.